This tutorial has been produced to give you an overview of the high-level decarbonisation intervention estimator and support with what to fill in and in what order. The estimator gives you a quick assessment of potential benefits when considering a range of decarbonisation interventions for your sites and buildings. This will be based on a single year's consumption and will not offer a future view. However, it's a useful first step in identifying potential solutions across your estate. The Estimator has been designed as a standalone tool to help you get started with your decarbonisation journey. However, if you're looking to produce a more detailed roadmap for how phased interventions will help you meet your decarbonisation targets, you can use the BAU Estimator and Decarbonisation Interventions Estimator in conjunction. And this is going to give you a picture of what your estate could look like in 2050 if you undertook interventions versus your BAU forecast. And we've produced a further 2 tutorials on these estimators and how they link together, so make sure to have a look at those. And then the only other thing to note before getting started is that this tutorial doesn't replace the user guide, so make sure that you have that open while you're filling in the estimator, as it will provide more information around specific inputs and how the tool works. So once you have had a read through of the user notes tab and you've got the relevant sections of the user guide to hand, we can move on and start having a look at the inputs tab. So this might look a little bit overwhelming, but I'm going to take you through this. This is basically the example estate that I've included for the tutorial, and in this example we have a healthcare estate. And this is also the same estate used in the tutorials for the BAU and decarbonisation intervention estimators, as well as the user guide. So, first thing you need to do is start right over on the left-hand side, and you're basically going to go through your estate and detail each of your different sites and then break them down into their respective buildings. You also need to give a use category from the drop-down as well as a gross internal area figure. And then finally, for each building, you need to indicate whether it's part of a heat network. We've got 2 heat networks. We've got Big Hill Health Centre and University Town Hospital. And all you need to do is, under the buildings for that particular site, you need to add in an energy centre. And then you need to make sure that for the buildings and the energy centre, you've ticked yes in this column. And this is going to make sure that we've just linked those buildings together, which is important later on. The next step is to input the reference year that you'll be using for all of your energy consumption data. And the main requirement here is that it's 12 months worth of consecutive data, just so that we're capturing seasonality. You might have sectoral or departmental targets that you're subject to that have set a baseline year for your emissions reductions target, so you'd need to use those. However, if not, then we'd recommend using the most recent year that you have the best quality data for, or even a couple of years, and you can average out across those. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and input all of your energy consumption figures for that particular year. And we're not going to go into too much detail on that as it's all in the user guide. However, you need to make sure that you've used appropriate conversion factors and apply these to your bills or your meter readings so that we have kilowatt hours across the board. The only caveat is where we have heat networks. So you might have noticed there's quite a few cells that are greyed out. And this is basically where we have buildings that are part of a central heat network. So in the first example, we've got Big Hill Health Centre. And essentially what I have done is I've input the gas consumption for the energy centre. And then that has been split out between the 2 buildings based on the use categories and the gross internal area figures that I provided. However, in our second example, University Town Hospital, again, I've input the total gas consumption for the energy centre, and then the split was known for this particular site between the buildings. So I've gone in and indicated that in the heat network column. However, as I said before, if you don't know the split, if you don't have submetering, then the estimator will work this out for you. Once you're happy that you've filled in all of your energy consumption data, you can move on and start having a look at interventions. So the main thing here is that we don't have the option in this high-level estimator to phase our projects by selecting a project start year, as this is supposed to be helping us provide a snapshot of how our energy consumption could change relative to our baseline if we applied all of our interventions at once. So when you're ready to look at this and revisit in more detail, then you can use the business as usual estimator and the decarbonisation interventions estimator in conjunction. So this is just going to give us a snapshot. So we'll start by looking at the energy efficiency columns, and these basically allow us to indicate the percentage of the site that we're going to apply the intervention to. So this is really useful where we're doing a partial intervention. So for example, if 50% of your building or site has already had its lighting changed to LEDs, but you're now undertaking the remaining 50%. And then, if applicable, the same will apply to our CHP and backup generation retirement. So again, you'll just need to indicate the percentage of the site that will apply to. We've then also got the option to look at heat decarbonisation projects for our estate. And as you might be able to see, there's again a couple of rows that are greyed out, and this is, as you've probably guessed, where we've got our heat networks. So in these cases, all we need to do is apply the new heating system to the energy centre for that particular heat network, and this is going to offset any heat currently distributed through the existing system. So, for example, if I wanted to replace the existing system in Big Hill Health Centre with, for example, a ground source heat pump, I can select that from the drop down. And then the column to the right of that is going to help us with sizing of that heat pump. And this is just an estimate based off of the gross internal area figure and the use category that we provided for that particular building or site. And then finally, we can look at renewable generation for our buildings and sites, and we can apply some wind and solar installations. So again, you'll need to select the type for each from the drop-down arrow and make sure that you've had a read of the user guide because it goes into a bit more detail around the different types. So for example, for Big Hill Health Centre, we obviously have our heat network. So it's likely that you'll be applying your installation to the energy centre. However, if you did want to apply at the building level, then the numbers for the estimated size will readjust accordingly, so you can have a play around with that. And then we can also add in a wind installation, and this again is likely to be at the energy centre level. So as you can see here, because we've got both solar and wind, then it's reduced the size that we'd need for our wind installation. However, if we just had wind, then the size of this would increase. And it's also worth noting that before you go ahead and apply a wind installation to a particular building or site on your estate, you'll need to have made sure that you've done an assessment on the space that you've got available to be able to install it, and also had a look at the exclusion zones that apply. So I've just quickly gone back and added in some projects so that we have something to work with when we move on to look at the output tabs. When you're happy that you filled this in for your own estate, then you can move on to the selections tab. So the first thing we need to do is select a reference year. And this is basically the year that we'll be getting a snapshot of our estate in after we've undertaken all of the interventions that we chose. So for example, here I've selected 2030. So this would give me a look at my estate in 2030 and what my energy costs are looking like, my emissions, and also my payback on all the interventions I selected. And you may want to rerun this a couple of times. So for example, I might also want to look at 2040 and then 2050 to get the longer term picture. You may also want to have a look at the different cost bases that we have for each of our fuel types. So this estimator uses the Green Book forecasted values for energy costs and emissions, and we've got a number of different levels available for each fuel type. So as a default, they've been set to medium, so I just leave that if you're not 100% sure. However, if you feel that your, for example, electricity costs are a lot higher than the mid level here, then you might want to up that a bit. And you can also have a play around with this and run the estimator a couple of times to look at different scenarios. Once you're happy with your selections, the absolute most important thing to do on this page is to click Update Output. And this is basically going to pull everything you've entered so far in the Input and Selections tab forward so we can have a look at our outputs. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, and this might take a couple of minutes, so I'll come back when it's complete. Once complete, you should automatically be taken through to the Output Summary tab. And this is basically our high-level overview for our entire estate if we undertook all of the interventions that we selected in the Inputs tab. And remember, obviously, we selected 2030 as our reference year in the Selections tab, so that's the year that we're getting a snapshot view of our estate in. So there's a couple of really useful things to point out on this tab. We've got this table over here that allows us to click through the various metrics that we're interested in and break them down by intervention type. So we've got our energy efficiency measures, our heat decarbonisation projects, and various renewable generation projects. And then over here on the right hand side, if we click on the visualize the relative impact of each of these. So for example, for consumption, we can see that a lot of the reduction in energy consumption in 2030 is due to our new heating systems that we have implemented. And then at the bottom, we have another useful table that helps us compare our interventions pathway to our BAU base case. So we can look at the relative changes in emissions, costs, and consumption, and we can also break this down by energy source. So the last thing to note is obviously that's given us our estate level view. However, we might want to break this down further and drill down into some of the detail by picking a particular site. For example, Big Hill Health Centre, and then within that I can select a specific building. And then to go back and look at a different site, I just need to make sure that I've clicked Clear Filter for both. We then come to our final tab, which is the Output Interventions tab. And this one basically gives you a tabular view of all of the different interventions for your buildings and sites, and the filtering allows you to break this down. So for example, if I wanted to look at a specific site, then I could select that. So I could select University Town Hospital, for example, and then within that site, I can go down to the building level. So as you can see here, this is just giving me a summary of all of the different interventions I've selected for that particular building and how they are going to affect these key energy metrics across the top. And then we can compare that to the BAU case. So as you can see, obviously, with our interventions, our energy costs are going to be massively reduced compared to what they would be in the BAU case. And the same, obviously, for emissions. So these ones in red here basically represent a reduction. So that's a really useful tool to help you sort of chop and change between the different buildings and sites across your estate and help you decide where you need to make your investment decisions. And just a flag, obviously, if you want to go back and have a play around with various different combinations of interventions for your different buildings, then you can do this, but you'll just need to make sure that you click Update Output each time to carry that forward into the output tabs. So I hope that you'll have found that that was a useful overview of some of the functionalities of the tool and how it could help you get started thinking about different investment decisions for your estate. The next step would then be to start having a think about how you could develop a more detailed roadmap for how your estate is going to meet your decarbonisation targets. So we've got our business as usual and decarbonisation intervention estimators to help with this, and these allow you to phase your different projects and also account for any planned changes to your estate in the future. So instead of getting a static view, we can look at how our energy costs and emissions are going to change over time between now and 2050. So thanks for watching, and if you've got any feedback having used the tools or any of the guidance, we'd love to hear from you. So make sure to drop us an email at psdecarbguidance@es.catapult.org.uk.